of the investigation in their entirety on the web. At the conclusion of our press conference today, these documents will be completely available for anybody to see on the internet, so you know exactly who it's talked to, what the evidence was, what the facts were, and hopefully by doing so, we are going to increase the public trust of this process. Let me also say, before we get into the actual facts, that the loss of any life is a tragedy. Vincent Belmonte should have lived longer than 19 years. And it's my fervent wish that no Ohio citizen should ever die because of a law enforcement action. I believe that that's going to probably not happen, but that's what I wish. That's what I would like to have. Fact of the matter is, there are criminals in the world. There are people who do evil, and the police, law enforcement exist to protect the rest of society. And the law that the grand jury is instructed on takes that into account and points out that when the life of other people or the law enforcement officer or other law enforcement is in danger, the officer is justified in using, on society's behalf, deadly force. In a moment, you'll hear from the special prosecutor from my office that presented this case. He'll walk you through at a high level the facts and the law as it applies to this particular case. And then we'll take some questions and answers. But I'd like to just sketch briefly at a high level what he's going to talk about in a little more detail. Mr. Belmonte did have a weapon, which was recovered on the scene, and the forensic evidence indicated that it was in fact his. As you can see on the photograph, it had an extended magazine. This extended magazine was visible to Sergeant McDonald when he viewed the weapon. He saw the weapon during the pursuit before the final confrontation and radioed that he had seen it and described it in sufficient detail that it supports or corroborates his view. The final part of this pursuit on foot occurred in a residential neighborhood. Behind the residential neighborhood is a school. Officer McDonald was aware of the nature of these surroundings. And one of the sad truths is that bullets don't stop if you miss at what you're shooting at. Mr. Belmonte, with his gun, presented a danger to innocent people in this neighborhood, and potentially in the school. And a bullet can go thousands of feet before it loses its fatal energy. So these facts, all in Sergeant McDonald's mind, who actually was on a training mission when all this occurred, factored into his decision. Finally, the pursuit was, he caught up to Mr. Belmonte as he was going over a fence. Officer McDonald saw the Mr. Belmonte going for the gun and yelled at him, "Don't do it, don't do it." That is corroborated by other evidence that you'll hear about in a moment, before he used his service weapon and fatally struck Mr. Belmonte. Again, a tragedy. I have children and grandchildren of my own. I can't imagine the grief that the family must bear in burying a 19-year-old son or grandson. And my heart goes out to them. My heart goes out to the community because this is a loss for all of us. It makes all of us a little bit less, it gives all of us a little less feeling of security. And yet, at the end of the day, Officer McDonald, Sergeant McDonald, did what his training and his duty required him to do in the protection of himself and others. And the grand jury has rendered its decision. With that, I would like to introduce Anthony Pearson. Mr. Pearson was a assistant prosecuting county attorney in a major urban county here in Ohio before he joined the Attorney General's office. He's highly skilled and experienced in these kinds of cases, as well as other violent felony prosecutions. He did a very thorough job on this, and he will now come and fill in some more of the details. Mr. Pearson.
Thank you. As the Attorney General stated, this incident happened on January 5th, 2021. Not in the early morning hours, but it was certainly before noon. Sergeant McDonald was training Officer Crozier on traffic stops and in duties of being a traffic officer for the East Cleveland Police Department. They were conducting routine traffic duties, and then they came across a car driven by Vincent Belmonte. That vehicle had a loud muffler. They attempted to pull that vehicle over. Sergeant McDonald was driving. Officer Crozier was in the passenger seat. The car pulled over, the car driven by Vincent Belmonte, pulled over, and it stopped for a brief period of time. Sergeant McDonald said, "Hold on, we're not going to get out yet because they may flee." That's exactly what happened. The car driven by Vincent Belmonte took off. Sergeant McDonald and Officer Crozier pursued that vehicle, driving through the city of East Cleveland. The vehicle driven by Vincent Belmonte was going at a high rate of speed. I think the speed that was quoted was between 50 and 60 miles per hour. The car was driving in a dangerous manner, at one point hitting a fire hydrant. At some point in time during this pursuit, the vehicle driven by Vincent Belmonte blew out 3 of the 4 tires and began to slow down quite dramatically. The officers were pursuing that vehicle, were essentially boxed it in. The vehicle driven by Vincent Belmonte came to a complete stop. He jumped out of the vehicle, Vincent Belmonte did, and fled. A little bit about that vehicle. That vehicle, as I stated, was driven by Vincent Belmonte, and the front passenger seat was a female, and in the rear of that vehicle was a male. Those 2 individuals also exited the vehicle and fled. Officers gave chase. Officer Crozier and Sergeant McDonald gave chase to Vincent Belmonte as he hopped over the hood of their police cruiser and fled. He actually ran out of his own shoes, Mr. Belmonte did, as he was running from the police officers. As the Attorney General stated, Vincent Belmonte had a weapon on him. And as Sergeant McDonald was giving chase, he aired that, he saw a weapon. And that weapon was a F&N 9mm with I believe the magazine held 22 rounds. So Sergeant McDonald was chasing Vincent Belmonte through a residential area. Officer Crozier decided to head them off, go in a different direction, see if they could trap Vincent Belmonte and take him into custody for his actions. As Sergeant McDonald was chasing Vincent Belmonte, they arrived at a fence in the backyard of someone's home. Mr. Belmonte was able to get over that fence. He got caught up briefly, but he was able to get over that fence. Sergeant McDonald never made it over that fence. He goes to the fence. He sees Vincent Belmonte, And as Mr. Belmonte is reaching into his hoodie, he's attempting to pull out his handgun. And it's at that time Sergeant McDonald discharged 3 rounds from his police-issued firearm. Those 3 rounds caused 4 injuries. We're not able to determine which shot came first or which one impacted Mr. Belmonte first. However, one of the shots went through Mr. Belmonte's right arm into his right chest area. So that wound was front to back. Mr. Belmonte was also struck in the back of the head, as well as in the lower right back area. He fell down almost immediately and died from those wounds. The pathologist who performed the autopsy on Mr. Belmonte said that both the head wound and the wound to the upper chest was likely fatal. Either one of those could have been fatal. The one in the chest caused a severe and extreme amount of blood loss. And the one in the back of the head that struck Mr. Belmonte also could have caused life-ending injury. After Mr. Belmonte was shot and he fell to the ground, Officer Crozier was able to finally get over the fence. Again, Officer Crozier was not in the immediate vicinity of Sergeant McDonald and Mr. Belmonte. He was a little bit a ways. But he was able to get over the fence, come to Sergeant McDonald, and essentially take Sergeant McDonald away from the scene. He took Sergeant McDonald away from the scene because at that time, other officers who were responding to the radio calls by Sergeant McDonald had headed off Vincent Belmonte's pursuit and were actually in the Apex Academy rear parking lot, and had come down. So they were on the other side of the fence with Mr. Belmonte. Sergeant McDonald and Officer Crozier never got over that fence. Sergeant McDonald was led away, and essentially the investigation started from there. Almost immediately, East Cleveland police officers called for assistance, medics. The medics arrived a short time later, attempted some life-saving techniques, and took Mr. Belmonte to the hospital in an attempt to save his life. As the Attorney General stated, they were not successful, and Mr. Belmonte ultimately died. The vehicle that was driven by Mr. Belmonte was reported stolen in October. Again, this incident happened where he was killed, happened in July 5th, 2021. I'm sorry, January 5th, 2021 was when Mr. Belmonte was killed. The vehicle was reported stolen in October of the prior year. The weapon that Mr. Belmonte had was reported stolen the following day. So on January 6th, the weapon was reported stolen, and it was reported stolen by the individual who was in the back seat of the car that was being pursued by the police officers. So the backseat passenger of Mr. Belmonte's vehicle reported the firearm stolen the following day. Police officers, as the Attorney General stated, are required to protect the community. And Ohio law, Supreme Court has held that law enforcement officers are allowed to use deadly force to protect the life and safety of individuals, citizens, as well as fellow police officers, as well as themselves. And an individual fleeing who has demonstrated an unwillingness to comply with police officers, a reasonable officer may feel that their flight with a weapon poses a great danger to the community and society. Additionally, however, Sergeant McDonald's statement was that he shot Mr. Belmonte, and Mr. Belmonte spun and fell to the ground. That would be consistent with the injuries that were reported from the pathologist, the coroner, that he was shot in the upper chest area, spun, and then could have been shot in the back from the remaining rounds that were fired by Sergeant McDonald. The body cameras worn. East Cleveland Police Department did not have cruiser cams at that time. They did not have cruiser cameras to pick up anything. However, officers did have body cameras. Officer Crozier turned on his body camera during the traffic pursuit. So when Vincent Belmonte's vehicle, or the vehicle he was driving, sped away, and Sergeant Larry McDonald and Officer Crozier began pursuing that vehicle, it was at that time that Officer Crozier turned on his body camera. So it picked up a large amount of this incident. However, it did not pick up the shooting because, as I stated, Officer Crozier attempted to head off Vincent Belmonte and was not in the exact same vicinity when Sergeant Larry McDonald shot and killed Vincent Belmonte. Officer Crozier was in a different area. However, we can hear audio from Sergeant Larry McDonald, who is yelling at Vincent Belmonte, please don't stop, please don't stop. I'm sorry, please stop, please stop. He was either saying police stop or please stop. It is unclear from the audio that we were able to extract, but he's saying either please stop or please stop. Please don't do it. Please don't do it. And before the shots were fired. So we do hear that audio loud and clear from Officer Crozier's body cam. Sergeant Larry McDonald's camera comes on for 2 seconds during the pursuit. That's the 2 seconds as Vincent Belmonte is getting over the fence. It's a 2-second video from Sergeant Larry McDonald's body cam. And Sergeant Larry McDonald told police investigators, or BCI investigators, that he actually thought his video camera was off and was turning it on. He didn't know that he had previously turned it on. We had a very close look at the body cameras that were used by East Cleveland Police Department at that time. And it is a GoPro camera. It's a little cube. It's a civilian type of camera with one button on it. You press the button, it beeps 3 times to let you know it's on, and you press the button again and there is no sound and it goes off. There's no flashing lights that remain on. There's no vibration or anything like that. And again, it is just one button, not an on button and then somewhere else on the device an off button. So that is the information of the investigation. Thank you.
Mr. Pearson and I will be happy to try to take any questions now. Thank you.
The first question is from Danny Eldridge with Hannah News Service.
Hi, Danny.
Hello, Attorney General. So my question is just about,
You might be muted.
I believe, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So what are the rules for pursuing something like this? Are police supposed to do chases when it's a stolen car? Is there a better way to get at this instead of, it's not, a capital offense to steal a car. So are there other ways that police can get at this issue without having to chase and end in a situation where someone's dead?
This is not a matter of state law by and large. This is a matter of individual department policy. And we can see multiple approaches to this policy around the state. Not every jurisdiction treats a hot pursuit in the same way. Your question is a good one. It's a question that has to be directed to, at this point, local governments that set these policies. We did not, in this case, examine the East Cleveland policy on hot pursuit because it was that was not what we were there to do. We were to look at the legality of the use of deadly force.
The next question is from Adam Faris with Cleveland.com.
Hello, Adam.
Hi. What were the specific charges that were no billed in this case?
I'm going to ask Mr. Pearson to address that.
With respect to officer-involved shootings, our policy is that we take all of them to grand jury for the people to hear the facts of the case and determine if there should be charges. So if it is clear to me that it was a legally sufficient shooting or legally justifiable shooting, that case still goes to the grand jury. If it is a case that I feel that the officer clearly did something wrong, it's a case that still goes to grand jury. With respect to the charges that are presented, the grand jurors are first tasked with determining whether the officer's actions were reasonable. And if the officer's actions were not reasonable, then they vote on specific charges. So I can't tell you how they came out, but the grand jurors did hear discussion of murder, felonious assault, tampering with evidence. Those are things that would come to my mind when looking at this investigation. So I can't go into any more specifics than that. Thank you.
The next question is from Nick Evans with the Ohio Capital Journal.
Hi there. This is for the Attorney General. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Thank you, sir. I want to go back to Danny's question. I know that BCI has a role as being sort of this independent investigative body for cities and in critical incidents, like you mentioned. Do you think the AG's office has a role to play in terms of coming up with best practices to like you said, try to avoid situations where things escalate this quickly and wind up with a person dead?
So the Ohio Collaborative is seated for state government purposes at the Department of Public Safety and includes local law enforcement. Their role is to develop and propose best practices, and I think that they probably have the lead role there. I don't want to be muddying the waters by having multiple players from the state saying this is how it ought to happen. At the same time, we are very much wanting to have a consistent statewide standard. It's one of the reasons we published the instruction manual for investigators, and are certainly willing to work with the existing collaborative, and if the legislature chooses to legislate on this topic, to work with them.
Thank you.
We have a follow-up question from Adam Faris with Cleveland.com.
Go ahead, Adam.
So just to make sure I understand right, Sergeant McDonald initially pulled over Vincent's car for a loud muffler. Is that right?
That's correct.
And just another question. What's the importance in this case and others that you review of having a body camera that Sergeant McDonald did not have on at the time of the shooting?
I favor body cams. I want every police officer in the state of Ohio to have a body cam. We are in a period of transition. There are lots of options on the technology. A GoPro, a civilian camera, is better than nothing. It's certainly not the best option on the market. I think that there are a lot of developments yet to happen, including the funding of the cameras and the funding of the storage. That is an even bigger problem because these files become massive. That being said, we're working with the governor and the Department of Public Safety. We're working with local law enforcement agencies. And I would like to get to a point where body cams are ubiquitous. Let me just say as well, I know that there are some that support law enforcement that feel that that's intrusive. 20 years ago, when I was a prosecuting attorney and we were arguing over dash cams and cruisers, I never had a case go south because of a video record. Officers do their job in very difficult circumstances, and the less reliable witness statements that sometimes occur in these situations are put into great context by actually having the video. The video tends to back up what actually happened. So I think body cams 20 years from now will not only be common, but I think they will prove to be law enforcement's greatest friend.
I have one more too. So the chase starting from a loud muffler, is that, I know you kind of touched on this, but is that appropriate for police departments to chase people for, having a bad car?
This is actually a subject of discussion here in my office and in criminal justice circles, because traffic stops for equipment violations sometimes do turn out badly, both for police officers and for the motorists. And when we're talking about a muffler or a turn signal, there's a good question as to whether those things are worth the risk. On the other hand, it's an indisputable fact that many fugitive felons, violent felons, are apprehended out of a police stop, traffic stop. And getting those people off those fugitive violent felons off the street is an important factor here. So I don't know that I can give you a definitive answer to that. I can tell you that I'm spending a lot of time thinking and reading about it and trying to imagine what might be a more effective and safer way to approach these things. But let's not view this in isolation. We have to recognize that traffic stops have been an extraordinarily valuable tool for public safety because of the encounters that happen with fugitives. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We will be doing these from time to time as we complete these cases. I think it's critical that the Attorney General's office be transparent and as complete as we can. I will never tell you that we are flawless, but I will tell you that every person in this office that touches these cases is working as hard as they can to do it by the book, to do it completely and independently and fairly, and to arrive at a proper conclusion. Thank you for your interest, and we'll be happy to follow up if any of you, after looking at the investigative files, have any further questions. I encourage you all to take the time to read Sergeant McDonald's narrative. He gave a very thorough statement, and you'll find that that's included among the other materials. I think Bethany is hitting send now, so that should be available on the web in moments. Thank you very much.